Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair. This episode is dropping on November the 5th, 2024, which is election day here in the United States. We've got a presidential election here, and so I call upon my fellow Americans to go out and vote. It's important that however you plan on voting, to make sure you both have a plan and know your rights. And I'm going to include a whole bunch of resources in the description. So, again, I encourage you, if you haven't already done so, go out and vote, do your civic duty today. And with that, back to the show.
Andy, go to the head of the class action.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, a show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hi, my name's Phil, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime fan of all things Nintendo.
I'm Kate. I've been writing software for over a decade, but not the fun kind.
It's so good to see all of you. Andy, it's been way too long since we have you on one of these recording. How you been doing?
Been doing okay. Listeners may or may not know, I moved in the last year to New Zealand, so the time zones are not always amenable to me joining in. I have been listening, though, to the deep dive in college sports. I do have to say, between this and CTE, my conscience has never felt so clear about not caring about sports.
That, I suppose, was my follow-up question. If you had any personal connection to either, sporting in general or sports video games, I suppose that answers that.
Yeah. I mean, I have played long ago a bit of sports games. My friend down the street, growing up, liked sports. So I think every now and then he would want to play a sports game. And so I would at his house play, whatever one of the NES football games or hockey games was. For the Genesis, my family did have NBA Jam, which was fun, and I like that. And that is a sports game that doesn't really try to mimic the real world applications of the sport. But yeah, never played a Madden, never played a 2K, and never touched a college football or NCAA game.
Welcome back for month 3 of our 4-month series looking at college sports video games as we try to answer that big historical question of why did it take so long for us to get college football 25? Why did it take 11 years for us to get a college sports game? And why did we go from almost 20 years of consistently having college sports games to having none for over a decade? And we've, over the last couple of episodes, talked about the evolution of college sports into a multi-billion-dollar industry. We talked about video games relationship to that. And last time we talked about how the system under which college sports operates treats the players, which, as we learned, is not terribly great, in that it tried to create all sorts of barriers to college athletes getting any kind of reasonable compensation from their performance, even creating ideas like the student athlete as a means of not having to pay, for example, workers' compensation when players get horribly injured in sports that often people get horribly injured in. So what we're leading into today is how they start doing something about that. But before we do that, I thought we would jump into, as we promised, top of the month, we'll do a little bit of Scandalous Games Sports Chat. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Thomas.
Welcome to Scandalous Games Sports Chat. Today, we're talking about the first game of the World Series, which does not involve the Phillies because they imploded. And I don't mind saying that. And now, cutting over to the college football top 5. Number 1, the Oregon Quacks, also known as the Oregon Ducks. They've moved up 1 since last week to number 1. Number 2 is Georgia. Those Bulldogs still bulldozing their way to number 2. Number 3, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Not to be confused with other Lions. Number 4, the Ohio State. Not to be confused with Miami University of Ohio. And then rounding out the top 5. Number 5, it's Texas, who used to be number 1 or 2, but is still just clinging to being a contender, which the Phillies can't because, as I mentioned, they suck.
Thank you, Phil. And again, just for the sake of keeping track of the accuracy of your standings, we recorded this on the 25th of October. It does happen to be game one of the World Series between the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Some of us think that's pretty cool, although again, I've been still in mourning over the fact that we had the best Phillies team we've seen at least since 2009, and they completely fell apart to the goddamn Mets.
And some of us are still bitter about it.
Listen, I mean, the way you both are talking, it's like you're asking for the fanatic to like blow his long tongue thing right into your ears. So I would just, Philly fanatic, hey, I'm still a believer. So you can leave me out of this.
We will do at some point, maybe as a bonus episode, the history of the Philly fanatic is very funny. There was a very hilarious legal battle over the likeness of the Philly fanatic. That could be a thing we talk about in the future. There was a little bit of sports news I wanted to bring up that I've been sitting on for a couple of weeks now. So for those of you who follow college sports, you might have noticed that on October the 5th, 2024, the Vanderbilt Commodores hosted the, at that point, #1 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. Vanderbilt, not a great program in the SEC, but Vandy came to play. This is, as Chris Berman likes to say, this is why they play the game, because Alabama came into Vanderbilt and lost 40-35 in a massive upset. And this, of course, a great deal of excitement for the Commodore faithful. And in a very common football tradition, what happens when an unranked or lower ranked team upsets a high ranked team like the #1 team in the nation, fans stormed onto the field. About 28,000 fans were in attendance at this game. They stormed the field, they tore down the goalposts, and they threw them in the Cumberland River.
Ooh, well, I guess Philly fans aren't necessarily the only fans in the world who have a monopoly on just destroying a place when things go well or when things don't.
Yeah,
they should have greased. Oh, I was just going to say they should have greased those goalposts, and then maybe they would have left them alone.
Yeah, we usually wait till nobody's playing in the stadium anymore to pry it apart and take those parts home.
You remind me of a story. My dad is a longtime Met fan. A story he would tell me about when they won the pennant in 1969. Fans stormed the field and started tearing the field apart, with people pulling chunks of the field out as souvenirs. But what's especially, I came across an article from the Tennessean, which is a Nashville, Tennessee-based paper, which covered the upset of Vanderbilt over Alabama. What's especially impressive about the achievement of throwing those goalposts in the Cumberland River is First Bank Stadium is where the Commodores play. It's 2.5 miles away from the river. So they had to tear the goalpost down and haul them 2.5 miles so they could throw them in the river.
I wonder if they marched them or if they just chucked them in a pickup truck or something.
I think they carried them.
I mean, either way, that's a lot of time to rethink what you're doing.
Yeah, but I guess at that point, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Just leave it in front of the Wendy's or something?
I kind of agree with Andy. I don't think there's enough natty light in the world to get it from the stadium to the river.
I've been to my share of college football games, a lot of Rutgers games. This shows how coddled we are in the Northeast, because I've been able to run onto the fields at the end of a game after an upset about 3 times. The biggest one was when Rutgers beat #3 Louisville in 2006. That was incredible. But whenever they did that, they always had a ground crew, which very carefully had like tools to pull the goalposts down. And then the security would set a perimeter around them so that we at Rutgers could not do things like they do at Vanderbilt.
Well, I mean, I think you can decide, is that coddled or is that just, the people at Rutgers know what's up and are like, hey, this it's not our first rodeo. The people at Vanderbilt will maybe be smarter next time.
All right, so that's been Scandalous Games Sports Chat. Again, we started with college football rankings and talked about property damage and rioting at the end. All right, so like I said, in our last episode, we talked a bit about how, the college football system as a whole has been largely built on the idea of universities and the NCAA and a lot of their partner corporations making just billions of dollars on college sports, with the athletes not seeing any of that. And even for those who argue that they go there to get a good education, even there are so many caveats and so many limitations to that. For example, the fact that a grant and aid scholarship for an athletic scholarship often comes thousands of dollars short, and then puts athletes in the pressured position of trying to find ways of making up that cost in a system where if it is even perceived they make any kind of money off the fact that they are athletes, they can lose their eligibility. So they're kind of over a barrel in this system, and it's oftentimes been a very unfair system for them. And all of this didn't sit well with some players. And this is going back to like their representations in video games. And a few decided to take on the likes of the NCAA and Electronic Arts to try to see if they can get at least a larger portion of the pie than nothing. And one such athlete was former college quarterback Sam Keller. Between 2003 and 2008, Keller played football at Arizona State University and later transferred to the University of Nebraska. And between those two schools, he had a bit of an up and down collegiate career that was hobbled by injuries. He went undrafted out of college and had brief stints with the Los Angeles Avengers of the Arena Football League, shout out to the AFL, and the Oakland Raiders of the NFL before ending his football career in 2008. After retirement, he served for a while as a high school quarterbacks coach, and last I checked, he worked for an Arizona liquor distributor. Like we said last time, a very, very small percentage of college players end up moving on to the professional leagues. However, while Keller did not see real-world football success, someone playing NCAA football 06 could theoretically go on a national championship run with Arizona State, led by a 6'4", 227-pound junior from California wearing number 9, all of which matched Keller's description when he played for the Sun Devils by a strange coincidence. Meanwhile, neither Keller nor any of the other players represented in NCAA football 06 or any other college sports game had any say in whether their likeness appeared in those games, and saw no portion of the profits, even after they were no longer student athletes. And Sam decided to do something about that. In 2009, he connected with Rob Carey, an injury and consumer claims lawyer based in Phoenix, and on May the 5th, 2009, Keller filed a lawsuit against Electronic Arts, the NCAA, and the Collegiate Licensing Company, alleging the companies were profiting from the likeness of college athletes without their permission or compensation, writing in the suit, quote, "With rare exception, virtually every real-life Division I football or basketball player in the NCAA has a corresponding player in Electronic Arts games with the same jersey number and virtually identical height, weight, build, and home state. In addition, Electronic Arts matches the player's skin tone, hair color, and often even a player's hairstyle, although this last characteristic can be highly variable over even a single season," end quote. The suit also pointed out that even though the athletes were nameless, Electronic Arts allowed gamers to add player names in themselves, arguing EA, quote, "intentionally circumvents the prohibitions on utilizing student athletes' names by allowing gamers to upload entire rosters, which include players' names and other information, directly into the game in a matter of seconds," end quote. And Keller was quickly not alone in taking EA to task for creating digital versions of college players while the players received nothing in return. And another notable former player to sue over video game likeness rights was Ryan Hart. Ryan Hart was the starting quarterback for Rutgers between 2004 and 2005. Hart had decent success at Rutgers, achieving what were then school records in career yardage and touchdowns, and leading the Scarlet Knights to their first bowl appearance in 27 years, incidentally, losing the 2005 Insight.com Bowl to Arizona State. Like Keller, his performance on the banks of the old Raritan did not lead to an NFL career. He tried out for the New York Giants, followed by a brief stint playing for the Albany Conquest of the Arena Football League's Development League AF2, before pivoting to a career in the insurance industry. And if you were a player of NCAA football 06 and started a game using the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, chances are your quarterback was a nameless 6'2", 197-pound quarterback hailing from Florida, wearing number 13, all of which, by a strange coincidence, fit Hart's real on-the-field description. And Hart filed a lawsuit against EA in late 2009. Incidentally, at the same time Hart played for Rutgers, anyone could also buy a number 13 jersey at the Rutgers University bookstore in New Brunswick, and one of those people who did just that went on to host his own podcast on video game-related controversies. Hold on, I've got my first outfit change.
What? What are we doing?
Oh man, listeners, I'm sorry that this is an audio medium because we're getting quite the striptease here. While Kevin is changing, I just realized colleges were really missing out on a prime opportunity here. Here, Kevin's back. I'm going to share this with him. All right, nice jersey, Kevin. I just realized, so when colleges sell these jerseys, they don't have names on them.
They do not.
But if I were a college, what I would do is I would separately sell a bunch of iron-on letters that matched the font, and you could just like buy a pack, and then at home, the fan can just iron on the name anyway.
That's like when, and you'll appreciate this, Phil, when, the Eagles had Carson Wentz, who was number 11, and then Wentz left the Eagles and they brought in A.J. Brown, who's also number 11. And there became very quickly a cottage industry of people who would sell you just the nameplate that had A.J. Brown's name, which you could sew or iron on to the back of your number 11 jerseys in case you didn't want to spend the money to get another number 11.
Well, that's like the jerseys they were selling when we went to Rutgers homecoming last week, Kev. They had the jerseys where you could get the embroidery on of an active player for like an extra $50.
So what's interesting about that is that's what came out of eventually skipping way ahead to after these lawsuits are over, when players now need to get compensation for their what's called their name, image, and likeness. So we were at the Rutgers UCLA game last week, and they had a whole section in one of the stores in the stadium that they called the NIL section, which is you could buy a blank Rutgers jersey for about $90, and for another $40, you could have the name and number of an active player ironed on in front of you. So they had this whole weird system where they weren't selling those jerseys specifically that they were already made. They were kind of made to order. And that was an example of what is now. Like back in the day when I got this, they just had number 13 jerseys in the bookstore. And it's just they happened to have Ryan Hart was number 13 at the same time too. So at least now they're getting something out of that.
Well, I was just going to say, can I also point out, Kevin, I was with you when you put your whole outfit on for the podcast, and I fully thought you were going to unbutton that jersey and like Superman have that thing underneath it when you were,
I didn't
the
think
way
that
you
part.
started getting yourself going there. No.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't blame people for wanting to do the patches because those jerseys are really expensive.
They are.
I've also seen people do Velcro for that part. So you can just get other Velcro names and just rip one off and put another on.
That's very economical. So yeah, so Ryan Hart, when he leaves Rutgers, he's one of these guys like Sam Keller who files a lawsuit over the uses of their images in video games. However, if you follow the name, image, and likeness debate and its relationship to video games, chances are the first name that comes to mind isn't Sam Keller or Ryan Hart. Rather, you're probably thinking about a former college basketball player named Ed O'Bannon. Now, has anyone heard of this name? Anybody heard of Ed O'Bannon?
Yeah, I have. I think I heard about him on probably an episode of NPR's Planet Money. I think talking about this very thing. It might have been while the suit was ongoing and before it had actually concluded. But from what I'm remembering, he basically, like, a friend pointed out to him, like, hey, this is basically you in this video game, right? And that kind of got him down this rabbit hole of, oh, well, yeah, that's basically me, but I didn't see any money from this.
Yeah, I basically knew what Andy said.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about this guy. So Edward Charles O'Bannon Jr. was born in Los Angeles, California on August the 14th, 1972. Growing up in LA, he was a breakout basketball star in high school, playing at Bourbon Day High School and later Artesia High School, where he earned several national high school basketball honors. In college, he played 4 years at UCLA, where the power forward was a key component in a fearsome Bruins team during the early 1990s. During 3 years as a starter, he was statistically one of the best players in the nation, consistently ranking in the top 20 in field goals, blocks, rebounds, and steals. He saved the best for his senior year during the 1994-95 season, when he helped lead the Bruins to an incredible 26-2 regular season record on his way to a men's basketball championship. During the title game against Arkansas on April the 3rd, 1995, O'Bannon scored 30 points and netted 17 rebounds, earning the NCAA tournament's most outstanding player alongside several National Player of the Year honors, including First Team All-American and Pac-10 Conference Co-Player of the Year. On February the 1st, 1996, UCLA retired his number 31, and he is considered one of the best players in Bruins history, alongside the likes of fellow UCLA greats like Bill Walton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. However, unlike Walton and Kareem, who went on to become NBA Hall of Famers, O'Bannon's impressive college play didn't translate into professional success. In 1995, he was drafted 9th overall by the New Jersey Nets, but poor play combined with nagging knee injuries hampered his pro basketball career. It also likely didn't help matters that the New Jersey Nets were absolute trash in the 1990s, to the point they almost rebranded themselves the New Jersey Swamp Dragons.
Yeah, I remember the logo was laughable, right? It was
God awful is how I describe it. I'm sorry, I can't interrupt. Yes, they're
no.
Hold on, I'll bring it up.
I feel like that's just courting mockery, like, because in sports you get sweaty, and one of the things that sometimes happens when you get sweaty is you have swamp ass. And like, why would you name yourself, the swamp dragon? I feel like it's really just asking for people to call you the swamp asses instead of the swamp dragons.
ESPN did a whole deep dive into the history of the New Jersey Swamp Dragons a number of years ago. So the story of this, I'll give you the really short version, is that the Nets were looking to rebrand because they felt like people didn't care about the Nets. The Nets is a very generic name. And so they gave it this very 1990s logo. For a team to get a full brand change, they need to have it approved by the NBA. At the time, there were 29 NBA teams. They had to have unanimous approval. It was voted 28-1, I believe, was the vote. The only declining vote were the New Jersey Nets themselves, who decided that this was a terrible idea, even after they put all the money into investing in a logo, a color, and a brand. And eventually they decided, no, this is ugly as shit. We're not going to do this.
It would have been funny if instead they were like, no, we need something even more, closer to our current brand. Nets is too generic. How about the New Jersey hoops? Or no, how about the New Jersey backboards? There we go. That'll be what we change to instead of nets.
Ration those boards.
The jersey seems like a ripoff of both the Toronto Raptors and the Charlotte Hornets.
A lot of it ties into the style in the 90s for NBA uniforms and designs was very cartoonish. So like you saw over the top designs of that, like the Detroit Pistons had one like that. There's like a big horse on the uniforms. The Houston Rockets had a big old basketball with like rings around it and rocket flying around it. You had the Washington Bullets a couple years before this rebranded as the Washington Wizards. There was a real big push in the 90s for NBA teams that were very kid friendly, for lack of a better term. And so in that respect, the Swamp Dragons are very much a snapshot of the way NBA design was at the time. But it's also like, yeah, the fact that like people originally realized the name is pretty dumb. And I believe there's one representative who talked about this. The last thing people want to associate the fact that New Jersey is the fact that the Meadowlands is a fucking swamp. Like we literally paid an advertising firm to call attention to the fact that we're in a swamp in Jersey. Anyway, so yeah, not good. And going back to O'Bannon, he was not terribly good with the Nets either. He had a bunch of nagging knee injuries from his time with UCLA, and he even acknowledges later on that like it just wasn't a fit for him. He never clicked in the NBA. He's one of those guys who's amazing talent in college, not really a great talent in the pros, as happens sometimes. And after a few stints with the Dallas Mavericks and the Orlando Magic, he left the NBA in 1997 and played a few years in several European leagues before retiring in 2004 at the age of 32. Now let's skip ahead to April 2009. And O'Bannon, then working as a car salesman in Nevada, visited friend and former UNLV basketball star Mike Curtis. And during his visit, O'Bannon watched Curtis's 9-year-old son Spencer play what was then EA's latest college basketball game, which was NCAA March Madness 09 for the Xbox 360. Among the game's features was the ability to play as historic teams, which led O'Bannon to a surprising revelation. And I'll let him tell the rest of the story as he shared it in his 2018 memoir, Court Justice. Quote, from the floor, Spencer grabbed the NCAA March Madness 09 video game case, the one with Kevin Love pictured on the cover. After the disc slid into the game system, it loaded up. First, the words Electronic Arts appeared, and I heard EA Sports. It's in the game. After several more seconds of loading, a select team menu came up. Spencer wisely chose the UCLA Bruins 1994-95 squad. And then there I was, in the starting lineup. Number 31, 6 feet, 8 inches, 222 pounds, power forward, left-handed shot. The digital avatar looks a lot like me. Now, my name wasn't there, but name or not, it was obviously me, end quote. And seeing his digital self in the game, O'Bannon was concerned that no one asked him whether it was okay to include him or any of the other former players featured in the game, and he was certain that none of them saw any money from that. With this thought in mind, several months later, Ed received a call from another important character in our story, a person named Sonny Vaccaro. Is anyone familiar with that name?
Was he the guy who created the Jordan brand at Nike?
He's the one who set up the deal, yeah. If you've ever seen the movie Air, he's played by Matt Damon. So Vaccaro, he's a notable figure in this whole story because he was an influential former marketing executive at Nike, Adidas, and Reebok. And he was one of the driving forces behind bringing branded apparel into college sports, allegedly coming up with the idea in the 70s of paying college coaches to supply their players with Nike gear. And so this becomes a transition of Nike becoming associated with not just an athletic shoe, but a basketball shoe. Is in the 1970s was paying college coaches, I'll give you the certain amount of money and you have your players all use Nike gear. Again, another fun way that college coaches can make money that is not available to the athletes who play it. He was also a key player behind Michael Jordan's historic 1984 deal with Nike to create the Air Jordans, and then later on, Kobe Bryant's 1996 Adidas deal. He was involved in that too. For years, Vaccaro hosted a basketball camp for the top high school prospects in the country, and he was well liked among players as a longtime supporter of the rights of college athletes. By the 2000s, he had become an outspoken critic of the NCAA and how it treated players. And when he called O'Bannon, he had been working closely with a group of lawyers looking to sue the NCAA for exploiting players under the guise of preserving amateurism while simultaneously generating billions of dollars in revenue. And while Vaccaro and legal critics of the student-athlete model felt they had a strong case against the NCAA for effectively running a sports-themed cartel, one thing they didn't have was a high-profile athlete willing to be their plaintiff. That's where Sonny came in. And Vaccaro leveraged his strong connections with current and former college athletes, pounding the pavement to find someone willing to be the person to take on the NCAA. And eventually, his calls led him to Ed O'Bannon, who thought back to seeing his digital self in NCAA March Madness 09, and after long discussions with his family, decided to help them out. As O'Bannon recalled, he feared the backlash to the suit, especially against his family. It's not just the NCAA, but like a lot of angry sports fans saying that you're ruining video games for everyone. And it's skipping ahead. There are people who did try to say that about Ed O'Bannon. However, he decided taking on the system he felt took advantage of him, and many other players outweighed the risks. Writing in his memoir, quote, "I replayed in my mind so many conversations and events from over the years. I remember being in study hall at UCLA and talking with teammates about how people were paying all this money to watch us play and we weren't getting any of it. We knew if we complained, they would be upset. So we kept quiet and kept our heads down. That was wrong. And now I had an opportunity to speak up for athletes. I had a chance to take on these older, out of touch, and mostly white guys from a completely different world. They sit and judge young men whom they know nothing about. They don't know anything about us. They don't know what college athletes have lived through and what they go through on a daily basis. And yet they pass judgment like arrogant professors and impose rules on athletes like they're the help," end quote. On July 21st, 2009, 2 months after Sam Keller filed his suit, and several months before Reinhardt's, O'Bannon, represented by the law firm Hausfeld LLP, filed suit against the NCAA, Electronic Arts, and the Collegiate Licensing Company over the use of the images of former college players in marketing, apparel, video games, and other college-branded materials without their permission or compensation. As the suit explained, quote, "While the NCAA, its member conferences and schools, and its for-profit business partners reap millions of dollars from revenue streams, former student athletes whose likenesses are utilized to generate those profit centers receive no compensation whatsoever," end quote. And despite numerous motions from the NCAA to dismiss this case, the suit gained steam over the next several years, expanding in scope and intensity. The NCAA tried to get this case thrown out numerous times throughout this process, but eventually it expands. For example, several other former collegiate athletes, including former NBA legends Oscar Robertson and Bill Russell, joined O'Bannon as plaintiffs. The suit also eventually grew to include current college athletes in addition to former ones. Initially, it was just former athletes, with several then current college players, including Vanderbilt linebacker Chase Garnham, Arizona linebacker Jake Fisher, and Clemson defensive lineman Darius St. Robinson joining the case as well. The Sam Keller case was at one point also folded into the O'Bannon suit as one big class action, but eventually somewhere down the line, the courts, they separated the suits, and so by the end, they were separate cases. Now, we're not going to go into a deep dive into the legal proceedings in no small part because I'm far from a legal expert, and I also really couldn't find great records of the play-by-play, as it were, for the suits. Rather, instead, we're going to try to place the O'Bannon, Keller, and Reinhardt lawsuits within the larger framework of some trends that were going on at the time. So on the one hand, when the three decided to take on the use of their likenesses in their video games, the collegiate amateur model was under heavy fire from critics of all shapes. And unlike during previous challenges, the NCAA's dominance of the issue was starting to crack. And all that we're going to cover in a future episode.
Can I real quick just make a dumb joke? It's a shame that it got unfolded from being a class action lawsuit, because how appropriate would it be for a case about college athletes to have a class action lawsuit?
Andy, go to the head of the class action.
Hey-o.
So yeah, on the one hand, at the time this is coming out, we're starting to see the fractures in this system. The NCAA is starting to lose ground. We're going to cover that next time. The thing we're going to talk about more about in these episodes is going to be how these three lawsuits over what came to be known as the name, image, and likeness rights, or the NIL rights of athletes, came at a time when likeness rights in general, and specifically in video games, were a really intense topic of debate. And the debate over that would shape the NCAA lawsuits and vice versa. The NCAA lawsuits would help to shape that larger debate. And so that's largely what we're going to talk about today. And so we're going to focus a lot on the relationship of image and likeness rights to video games. And then we're going to go back to talking about the debate over these lawsuits and the legal merits of these suits. A lot of it's going to involve talking about how notable people are depicted in video games. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So before, I've been talking a lot, right? I just want to check in. How are we doing so far?
Well, yeah. If you are making money off of somebody else's work in some way, they should be able to be compensated for it. And I am glad that this is skipping ahead, a rare instance where the players actually did get a win off the field.
Things are happening more or less as I suspected they would. I'm more interested to see where all of this ends and how we got to today.
All right, so let's dive in. With all that in mind, I feel like the important first place to start is talk about video game likeness rights when it comes to athletes, to sports figures. And we're talking about what's called the name, image, and likeness now. Name, image, likeness rights or NIL rights. And so let's briefly define what we mean when we say NIL. In the context of video games, NIL refers to the use of a name, digital likeness, and or footage of a person, such as a player or a coach, and the ability to monetize that usage, such as through setting up likeness deals with game companies. And in the context of players, this includes presenting things like their name, their number, their equipment, their physical appearance, and their playing style in a digital form, or even also displaying still images or video footage of those actual players in action as part of the game's overall presentation. However, NIL as a whole covers a variety of ways athletes can utilize their name, image, and likeness as public figures. These include appearing in TV, print, and or social media advertising, having footage of their gameplay rebroadcast, hosting public appearances such as autograph signings, and selling memorabilia such as autographs, equipment, or jerseys. All of those are encompassed within the umbrella that is NIL. And also going with NIL rights is also the ability to work with professional representation like an agent to negotiate those on a person's behalf. When it comes to video games based on pro sports, such as the NBA, the NFL, or Major League Baseball, NIL rights are usually negotiated by professional players' unions, such as the NFL Players Association, the National Basketball Players Association, or the MLB Players Association, who set up likeness packages with video game companies on behalf of their members. So it's a really common part of union negotiation that the union negotiates on behalf of all the athletes with game companies to set up these deals. However, what's really interesting about that is that if a player gets famous enough, they may opt out of the players' union deals in favor of setting up their own in hopes of getting more money for their NIL. And perhaps the most famous example of this is legendary basketball player and crying meme subject, Michael Jordan. During the 90s, Michael Jordan opted out of the National Basketball Players Licensing Agreement, forcing game devs to pay tribute to his royal heiress in the form of lucrative individual licensing deals on top of the NBPA deal if they wanted him to appear in their games. So if you were ever curious, if you were a basketball video game fan in the 90s and wondered why Michael Jordan never appeared in games, this is why. Because he had his own NIL deal that they had to deal with on top of the NBA's in games. This is why he didn't appear in NBA Jam. This is why he didn't appear in NBA Live. You could, however, use Cyber Michael Jordan to defeat the evil Dr. Max Cranium and rescue captured basketball players with an arsenal of elementally themed basketballs in the 1994 Super NES title, Michael Jordan, Chaos in the Windy City.
So you did not see Michael Jordan on the Bulls in NBA basketball games in the 90s?
Not officially, no.
So who did you see?
I'm trying to remember who would be in NBA Live games. I know that in NBA Jam, they just focused on, so NBA Jam, for example, had a really limited roster in their games. And I believe the ones they focused on, I played a lot of tournament editions, so I'm basing on that. They focused on Scottie Pippen, BJ Armstrong, and like Luke Longley or Tony Kukoc. That was the other one, Luke Longley and Tony Kukoc. So they would do everybody but him.
So it would be like the Bulls roster when Michael Jordan was getting a breather. It would be like Kukoc and Rodman and Pippen and a couple of other stiffs.
Whenever Michael Jordan's not on screen, people should be asking, where's Michael Jordan?
Where's Michael Jordan?
I'm going to show you briefly from a long play of Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City. If nothing, just the opening setup for this game, because I think it's very funny. So I'm going to bring that up here. So here is... I'll show you really briefly the opening comic at the start that sets up the framework of Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City. Developed by Electronic Arts. It's a windy day in Chicago. First practice for an all-star charity game. Michael shows up and finds his team has disappeared.
Their stuff is here, but they're not. This is weird.
Suddenly, through a skylight, crash! A ball with a note scrawled on it.
Mr. Jordan, if you want to save your pals, come to the Egyptian room in the Field Museum at midnight. Come alone, Dr. Max Cranium.
Man, this is serious. I better check it out.
That night, a guard lets Michael into the closed museum in the Egyptian room.
Oh my, well, I'm here now. What? Hey, a door in the wall. For
He enters
Michael
warily.
Jordan.
He enters warily,
What the?
finding himself at the entrance to an underground prison. Michael sets out to find his friends. And thus begins the adventures of Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City.
Pretty good Michael Jordan impression, right?
Flawless.
Yeah, thank you.
Top notch.
Now, you'll notice what I said before. I said that officially licensed Michael Jordan appearance because sometimes game companies would stiff him on the licensing fees and put him in anyway. For example, EA Sports NBA Live 96 had a create a player feature. And if you just happened to create a character named Jordan, the game would helpfully auto-generate a shooting guard from North Carolina with number 23 and some pretty awesome stats, who you could then add to the Chicago Bulls. And in fact, you could do this with a bunch of NBA rookies and legends in that game, including Bill Walton, Julius Erving, aka Dr. J, Damon Stoudemire, and relevant to our series, Ed O'Bannon. You could put Ed O'Bannon in this game too, because at the time he was a rookie. In 2003, going into this theme again of athletes who opt out of their respective players' associations set up their own deals, in 2003, San Francisco Giants outfielder and allegedly extremely roided up person Barry Bonds pulled a similar move, opting out of the Major League Baseball Players Association licensing deal and staking out on his own. Now, this put Electronic Arts, who were making the MVP Baseball series at the time, in a really difficult position. How do they make MVP Baseball 2005 without baseball's rating most valuable player? However, developers EA Canada quickly came up with a solution. As one former employee recalled to a reporter for MLB.com in 2020, quote, "We were kind of discussing what to do, and one of my bosses said, well, we'll just create a fake Bonds and give him someone else's name," end quote. And that employee's name in that interview was former producer John Dowd. Has anyone heard that name before? John Dowd.
No.
Hold on. I have to make another wardrobe change.
Wow, I didn't realize there would be so many costumes in this episode. I feel underdressed. Yeah, so while Kevin's changing, do we all assume that it's just like the creative player named Schmary Schmans?
Yeah, I'm thinking they went a pretty lazy route.
All right. So John Dowd was a producer for EA Canada. And when they had...
Kevin,
What's up?
Kevin,
What's up?
are you John Dowd right now?
Hold on.
It's blurry. Oh, I see.
Oh, wow, that jersey does say Dowd.
Yeah. So this one I got custom made. I found a site where I get jerseys for relatively cheap as they're knockoffs. And I decided it was like $15. I said, what the hell? I'll make a John Dowd jersey. So John Dowd became the name of, they basically tried to create a digital stand-in for Barry Bonds, but they couldn't put Barry Bonds in the game because of his licensing deal. So what they did is they made like a legally distinct version of Barry Bonds that they named John Dowd. And John Dowd is arguably the most legendary ball player to ever grace a digital diamond. Cyber John Dowd was essentially a legally distinct version of Barry Bonds with beastly stats to reflect the reigning home run king, with a big asterisk there. He had incredible batting stats. He had 90s across the board. He was a machine. I mean, he was literally a machine because they made him as code in the game. And so unlike Bonds, who was black and wore number 25, Dowd was white and wore number 51. Clearly different people. And unlike Barry Bonds, as far as I know, John Dowd never had any steroid allegations.
No, but he was juicing his code, I heard.
Bending reality around him. And Dowd quickly developed a reputation among MVP Baseball 2005 fans as a fearsome hitter who is sometimes memed and referenced by baseball fans of a certain age to this day. I'm going to read you very briefly a post from R Baseball, the subreddit R Baseball, from December the 20th, 2023, which the headline is Hall of Fame, making a case for John Dowd. Quote, it's been a tough one because he's been retired for 20 years and never received a Hall of Fame vote. However, from 1986 to 2003, Dowd was a 6-time MVP, 8-time Gold Glover, 11-time Silver Slugger, and a 12-time All-Star. He had 14 out of 18 seasons with 30 or more home runs and led the league twice, including setting the all-time record in 2001. He also led the league in slugging percentage 6 times and had 10 seasons batting over 300. In his last year, became the only member of the 500-500 club. John Dowd, having never failed a steroid test, is one of the greatest and most feared hitters of all time, yet people don't want him in the Hall of Fame because he's a video game character. There is no other reason for it. If anyone has any other reason, I'd like to hear it. I ask you, if a gold record of who's on first can be a Hall of Famer, why can't John Dowd? End quote.
Wait a minute. A gold record of who's on first is in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I believe so. The whole routine is like memorialized.
As a player?
Yes, as a player.
Yeah.
Who's on first was a Silver Slugger. No one knows about that.
It's interesting, Kate, because it was inducted as a player, and then 30 years later, who's on first was inducted as a coach.
Oh, okay.
Them having reused the name John Dowd in what sounds like a bunch of different games reminds me of how Alan Smithy is the world's most prolific director. And for those who don't know, it's a pseudonym directors will use when they feel like the movie they've been forced to make a really terrible movie, and so they won't use their own name. They'll use Alan Smithy.
Prolific director, but not exactly a great track record.
That's interesting. What if you took all vacated wins and like vacated stats of all like steroid or cheating athletes, and you ascribed all of them in every sport to John Dowd? Like, what would his stats be?
The greatest athlete of all time.
Yeah, like remember that season where he replaced the entire 53-man roster for the what is it? The Michigan Wolverines?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I stopped liking John Dowd quite as much when he was underinflating footballs and eavesdropping, intercepting play calls. I don't know.
Yeah, the John Dowd Spygate. My goodness.
Do you remember that home run race that happened that one year in the 90s to see who was going to break the home run record that was set by Hank Aaron? I think it was John Dowd versus John Dowd.
Yeah, I think it was John Dowd against another John Dowd.
Yeah. I was on the edge of my seat.
The only thing that can stop a John Dowd is another John Dowd.
Get me a goddamn John Dowd.
As a really fun aside, in that 2020 MLB.com interview I mentioned a minute ago with the real life John Dowd, the real John Dowd told reporter Mike Monaghan that San Francisco Giants announcers Mike Caruco and Dwayne Kuiper, who are the announcing team in MVP Baseball 2005, once had Dowd sign a baseball and put it in Barry Bonds' locker.
That's cold.
I don't know. I've never heard any record of Barry Bonds acknowledging that, but I just think that's very funny.
I'm sure he in a rage he just like crushed the baseball in his bare hand,
crushed it into dust through non-performance enhancing reasons. So that's a little bit about the athletes, but like beyond professional athletes, negotiations over how and where public figures are represented in games can be really complicated. For example, this is one Kate introduced to me. Actor Tom Cruise opted not to have his likeness in the 2002 Activision title Minority Report Everybody Runs, even though he starred in the film on which the game was based. With the game's version of protagonist John Anderson, basically this like generic looking white character model with white hair. So he's like, again, trying to make him as un-Tom Cruise as they can. And the same went for the 2004 fighting game based on the movie Fight Club, with the digital likenesses of several of its main characters, including Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, and Meatloaf, being generic dudes who vaguely resembled in a non-legally actionable way their film counterparts. However, that isn't to say they got nobody, because Fight Club, the video game, did get one notable person to license their likeness as a playable character. Anybody want to guess who it was? You're never going to guess.
Meatloaf.
No, not Meatloaf.
It was Fred Durst, right? No? No, what? Come on. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Fred Durst.
Why do you have to give me so much shit about that, man?
Yeah, they got Fred Durst, Limp Bizkit frontman himself, to keep on rolling.
I was hesitating because if I was wrong, I was going to sound crazy.
This is one of those things where, like, even if you're right, you sound crazy, you know? It was 2004. We were all about Fred Durst because he knows you'd be loving this shit right here. At LMP, Bizkit is right here fighting against a generic-looking version of Brad Pitt in this video game.
Well, if you don't care, then we don't care.
But yeah, so Fred Durst in this game. I believe Abraham Lincoln was also a secret character, which makes me disappointed because I feel like William Shatner should be in there too. But anyway, as another example, in 2003, BMX rider Dave Mirra sued a claim over the game BMX XXX, which, as an aside, will probably be a future episode. It was a BMX racing game which was originally going to bear his name in the title until he left the project when Acclaim decided to stuff the game full of topless women in a desperate attempt at pandering to the horny gamer dude crowd. And even though Mirra's name or likeness didn't appear in the final game, Mirra alleged Acclaim misused his NIL without his permission and damaged his reputation in promoting what his lawyers called a, quote, pornographic game, end quote. Now, you may recall that this was while Acclaim was in their we'll do anything for attention phase that included allegedly offering to pay expecting parents a $10,000 savings bond for naming their new baby Turok in 2002, and allegedly attempting to encourage bereaved families in the UK to take out advertising based on deceased relatives' headstones to promote Shadow Man's Second Coming. And for all of that and more, check out our very first episode for the show. And stuff like this, I feel like hopefully helps to explain why the characters in Square Enix's recent games based on Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers have kind of like an off-brand generic soda look to them compared to the actors who played them in the MCU.
Yeah, and God forbid they just make them look like the comic book characters they're nominally based on. Instead, we have to make them look like they're just movie stunt doubles for some reason.
And even when everyone comes to the table and agrees that a famous person will appear in a video game, it is sometimes not always clear the limits of what a game company can and not do with their digital likeness. And as Ed O'Bannon, Sam Keller's, and Reinhardt's respective lawsuits made their way through the courts, there were a series of other legal battles over video game representation going on in the late 2000s and into the 2010s. Perhaps the most high-profile legal target in the games industry aside from EA was Activision, which through the 2010s faced several suits of hilariously varying merit over their usage of people's likenesses in their games. So, for example, on September the 1st, 2009, Activision released what was then the latest installment in the Guitar Hero rhythm game series, Guitar Hero 5. One of the things that they added in Guitar Hero 5 was the ability to unlock digital avatars of real-world musicians as playable characters. And this included Kurt Cobain, Carlos Santana, and Johnny Cash, who could perform in the player's digital cover band. You would do a challenge and you could unlock them and they could be part of your band and be like your lead singer's avatar, for example, or it could be a band member's avatar. However, it isn't clear what amount of leeway those musicians or their respective estates signed over to Activision when they agreed to appear in Guitar Hero 5. For example, can you only use them for their respective songs? Or is it okay to have like a face-off between Johnny Cash and Kurt Cobain over who can belt out a better version of Wild Cherries Play That Funky Music? And this very point became a source of contention for people connected to these artists. For example, following Guitar Hero 5's release, Kurt Cobain's widow, Courtney Love, put out a profanity-laden 70-post Twitter rant, 70 posts, about the Nirvana frontman's inclusion in the game, later declaring to a reporter for The Guardian, quote, "For the record, I did not approve Kurt's avatar for the Guitar Hero 5. She spells it Guytarhero 5, all one word. And she threatened to sue Activision over this. Now, Activision representatives responded that Courtney Love had in fact agreed to allow Kurt Cobain's inclusion in Guitar Hero 5, even personally selecting the hairstyle and outfit his avatar ultimately wore in the game. Meanwhile, former Nirvana members Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic did not deny Cobain's estate agreed to his appearance in the game. However, they called upon Activision to make his likeness only available for Nirvana songs. Posting on the official page of Grohl's band Foo Fighters, quote, "While we are aware of Kurt's image being used with 2 Nirvana songs, We didn't know players had the ability to unlock the character. This feature allows the character to be used with any kind of song the player wants. We urge Activision to do the right thing in relocking Kurt's character so this won't continue in the future, end quote. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess it would depend on, like if I were signing my likeness rights away, I would assume the contract would say something like for any and all purposes or exclusively for Nirvana songs or something like that. Though it is interesting to think about the idea of were Activision to relent and lock Kurt Cobain back up to be exclusive to Nirvana songs, I can imagine a bunch of fans feeling weirded out by that, just in terms of that whole sense of like the overreach of, digital entertainment providers of like, geez, I don't own anything, huh? It's just like you can like reach in and make a tweak to the game, and now a thing I had access to, I don't have access to anymore, which is, you could do a year-long series of episodes about that kind of thing happening, Kevin.
I will say, I'll just also acknowledging this was Guitar Hero 5, I don't know that it would have just been something that I would take for granted. Then, well, of course, that means that they can use my likeness in any old way they want in all of the game. Like, I could see this being something that they didn't understand or didn't know the impact of until it was happening. I mean, nowadays, I think it would be more something that you could kind of think, okay, so I'm signing away my likeness and you get to do whatever the hell you want with it. And that means anything that you can figure out how to do later on, too. But I think it makes sense to me that there was sort of a sure you can use Kurt Cobain's likeness in you're going to put the Nirvana songs in there. Sure, he can be in the band playing those songs, playing in the band, and then not realizing what that means to make this an unlockable character.
Yeah, and I think this is still at a time when even musicians like this are not really, are not probably not thinking about video games in that sense either.
Like you mentioned, Tom Cruise, and from my understanding, like he had some foresight even back when like Top Gun came out, like the original, to put some stuff into we should look this up. I should look this up to make sure I'm saying this correctly. But like he had the foresight to basically be like, I don't want to be an action figure, and then later on, that's what trickled into the Minority Report video game because he was just like, I don't want my likeness popping around on little toys and stuff like this. But often it's not something that everybody is either going to think of or necessarily feel like they have the latitude to push back against. Like I wonder how many musicians were sort of like, well, I don't like this, but I signed on. What am I going to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what's interesting is while Courtney Love never took Activision to court, several other artists did sue the company over their likeness in a different rhythm game. Several months after Love's objections, on November the 4th, 2009, the band No Doubt sued Activision, accusing the company of misrepresenting the band's members' likeness in the game Band Hero by allowing players to use the group, thus reducing the band to, according to the lawsuit, quote, virtual karaoke players, end quote. As one example, they cited using an avatar of lead singer Gwen Stefani to sing the Rolling Stones song Honky Tonk Woman, arguing this song did not represent No Doubt's brand, writing in the suit, quote, while No Doubt are avid fans of the Rolling Stones, and even have performed in concerts with the Rolling Stones, the character manipulation feature resulted in an unauthorized performance by the Gwen Stefani avatar in a male voice boasting about having sex with prostitutes, end quote. 2 years later, in August 2011, Maroon 5 frontman Adam Levine filed a suit on similar grounds, accusing Activision of, quote, fraudulent inducement, breach of contract, violation of the common law right of publicity, and unfair business acts or practices, end quote, for including the ability for his digital representation to have other performers' voices, quote, including female ones, end quote, synced to his digital mouth.
Oh, no.
I am not a girl. I should not sound like a girl.
I don't sound like a girl. I'm not a girl. You stop that.
Activision ended up settling out of court with No Doubt in 2012. However, I found no record of what happened with Levine's lawsuit. So if you have any sources, please reach out to me, scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com.
Are you talking to Adam Levine directly? Adam, reach out.
Yes, Adam. I know you didn't want to sound like a lady in those video games. So let me know how that all turned out. You have my email address. However, by far the strangest likeness lawsuit against Activision had to be from former Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. Bet you didn't think that's where this story was going. Who on July the 15th, 2014, sued the company for, quote, blatant misuse, unlawful exploitation, and misappropriation for economic gain, end quote, of his likeness when a digital version of it appeared as a character in the 2012 Treyarch game Call of Duty Black Ops 2.
Like, kind of wondering how was he playing the game himself? Did somebody from his crew tell him? Like, and if so, who's going to tell him? Oh, he's going to be so mad. I'm not telling him. You tell.
Manny, they got a game about you now.
Well, how are they legally allowed to use his likeness without his permission in a video game?
I'll talk a little bit about how they legally argue this.
I was going to say, I'm not assuming that they are legally allowed to, but go on.
I would assume because, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about what's called right of publicity. The fact that he's a publicly recognizable figure and a head of state, that one could make the argument then that his image is kind of out there in the same way of like, if I guess it was a president or whatever. I mean, this is also the same game series where you can fight Nazi zombies with Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy.
They were probably in the pitch meeting for that version of Call of Duty, and they're like, what differentiates this from all the other Call of Duty games? And they're just like, this one's got Manuel Noriega. I like it. And then he hands him a big bag full of cash with a cartoon dollar sign on it.
Yeah. The 8-year-olds playing this game are really going to love this.
Well, they have this whole thing in Black Ops in particular. They love going back to, again, like black operations of like, in the 60s and the 70s and the shady stuff the U.S. was involved in. So like in the first Call of Duty Black Ops game, the game opens up with you killing Fidel Castro. And in one of these, they have a section where you, I guess, encounter Noriega. And so he didn't like this. Well, now Noriega had been overthrown in 1989 and was at the time serving life imprisonment in Panama for, among other things, drug trafficking, racketeering, and executing political opponents. Argued Activision profited off his likenesses without his consent, and that the game's portrayal of him as a, quote, kidnapper, murderer, and an enemy of the state, end quote, damaged the incarcerated, deposed dictator's reputation. I go back to your question, Kate. How did he find out about this?
Maybe they have, like, I don't know, video game day where he was in prison.
In that Panamanian prison, they have rest time and two guys are playing Black Ops. Wait a minute, sure. That's me.
Wait a second.
Well, if you are, like, under constant suspicion that the U.S. is going to assassinate you at any moment, you would actually try to have some sort of counterintelligence apparatus, right?
Well, but wasn't he? You just said he was in prison at the time, right?
He was in prison, yes.
Yeah.
That's where he's most vulnerable.
So yeah, Noriega sues Activision, and a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge dismissed the suit on free speech grounds on October the 28th, 2014. Interestingly, another random interesting fact about this case, one of Activision's attorneys was real-world equivalent of Lionel Hutz without the charm of Phil Hartman, Rudy Giuliani.
Ooh. Yikes. Can I assume he delivered the press release about this in front of a Four Seasons landscaping company?
He was on a street corner. I won! Yeah, Rudy, thank you. Move along.
Please stop farting.
If I give you this bottle of bourbon, will you go away? Oh, fuck you, Rudy. It's the official stance of the show. Anyway, and on that defamatory note, why don't we wrap up things today? And next time, we'll take a closer look at the legal debate over both the rights of athletes and how that weighed against the rights of video game developers to free speech, which is really just a really complicated conversation that we'll just, again, pick up next time. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NC SA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil.
I'm Andy.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube and listen to So We Were Talking About B-Sports wherever you get your podcasts.